There are moments that change everything. Moments when the world seems to hold its breath, and the line between life and death becomes razor thin. For Elizabeth, that moment came on a cold February night, when the shadows of her past finally caught up to her. She had spent years building a life of hope, of dreams, of quiet determination. A life she thought she could control. But control is an illusion, especially when love turns to fear, and fear turns to survival. That night, as the winter air bit at her skin, and the streets of Chicago lay eerily silent, Elizabeth made a choice. A choice that would defy everything she had been taught to believe about love, loyalty, and sacrifice. She said no. She refused to get into his car. She chose freedom over fear. But freedom comes at a cost. And for Elizabeth, that cost would be paid in blood. What followed was a nightmare that would shock an entire community, expose the failures of a system meant to protect her, and leave 3 people fighting for their lives. But to understand how this ordinary night erupted into violence, we need to go back to where it all began. Back to the moments when love first turned to control, and control turned to terror. This is the story of Elizabeth, a woman who ran for her life, not just from a man, but from a cycle of abuse that had trapped her for years. This is the story of courage, resilience, and the unbreakable human spirit. And this is the story of the night she finally said, "Enough." Here on Crime Storyteller, we don't just share stories. We uncover the truth behind the headlines, the humanity behind the horror, and the lessons we can all learn from the darkest moments of life. But be warned, this is not just a story about one woman. It's a story about all of us, about the systems we trust, the relationships we endure, and the moments when we must decide, do we stay or do we run? This is Behind Closed Doors, the night she ran for her life. Only on Crime Storyteller. Meet Elizabeth, a woman who, by all appearances, was living the life she had always dreamed of. At 24 years old, she was a dedicated postal worker, a loving mother, and an ambitious entrepreneur with a growing cosmetics business. To her colleagues, she was the woman who always arrived early, worked tirelessly, and never complained. To her friends, she was the one with the brightest smile and the kindest heart. And to her young son, she was simply Mom. But behind that smile was a secret Elizabeth carried for years, hidden beneath layers of resilience and determination. A secret that would nearly cost her everything. Elizabeth's story begins in Chicago, 2017. A city known for its grit and resilience, much like Elizabeth herself. She had grown up in a tight-knit family, where hard work and perseverance were not just values but necessities. From a young age, Elizabeth dreamed of building a better life, not just for herself, but for her son. Her days were long and demanding. By day, she sorted mail at the post office, a job she took pride in for its stability and sense of purpose. By night, she poured her energy into her cosmetics business, mixing lipsticks and foundations in her small apartment, determined to turn her passion into a thriving enterprise. Those who knew her admired her drive. She was the kind of person who made the impossible seem achievable, who turned setbacks into stepping stones. But what they didn't see was the weight she carried behind her smile. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the fear that one wrong move could unravel everything she had worked so hard to build. Elizabeth's life was a delicate balancing act, a juggling of responsibilities, dreams, and secrets. And at the center of it all was her son, the light of her life. She often said he was her reason for everything, her motivation to keep going, even when the world felt like it was closing in around her. But as much as Elizabeth's life was defined by her strength and determination, it was also shaped by something darker. Something she kept hidden from the world, even from those closest to her. Because Elizabeth wasn't just a mother, a worker, or an entrepreneur. She was also a survivor, and her survival would soon be put to the ultimate test. To understand how Elizabeth's life spiraled into chaos, we need to go back to the beginning, to the man who entered her life with charm and promises, only to leave behind a trail of destruction. This is the story of how love turned to control, control turned to fear, and fear turned to survival. But more than that, this is the story of a woman who refused to be defined by her pain. A woman who, against all odds, found the courage to fight back. This is the story of Elizabeth, a mother, a dreamer, and a survivor. And her story is just beginning. It started small, a comment here, a question there. The kind of thing that could easily be brushed off as concern or even love. But beneath the surface, something darker was taking root. John had entered Elizabeth's life like so many others before him, with charm, with promises, with what seemed like love. At first, he was attentive, caring, even protective. He made her feel seen, valued, and safe. But as their relationship deepened, so did his need for control. It began with subtle remarks, comments about her clothing. "Are you really going to wear that?" he'd ask, his tone laced with disapproval. At first, Elizabeth laughed it off, chalking it up to his personal taste. But soon, the comments grew sharper, more frequent. Then came the questions, endless questions about her whereabouts, her friends, her plans. "Where are you going? Who are you meeting? Why didn't you answer your phone?" What started as curiosity quickly turned into suspicion, then accusation. Elizabeth found herself explaining every move, every decision, every moment of her day. She began to second-guess herself, wondering if she was overreacting, if she was being unfair. After all, wasn't this just what love looked like? Wasn't this what it meant to care? But as the weeks turned into months, the control grew more insidious. John's suggestions became demands. His requests became ultimatums. He began to isolate her from her friends and family, convincing her that they didn't understand their relationship, that they were trying to come between them. Elizabeth's world began to shrink. The vibrant, independent woman who had once dreamed of building a better future for herself and her son was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone who walked on eggshells, who lived in constant fear of saying or doing the wrong thing. And then came the first bruise. It happened during an argument, one of many that had become a regular part of their relationship. John had accused her of lying, of hiding something from him. When she tried to defend herself, he grabbed her arm, his grip tightening until she cried out in pain. The next day, she found herself explaining away the mark, telling herself it was an accident, that he hadn't meant to hurt her. But deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't love. This wasn't care. This was control. And it was only the beginning. As Elizabeth's life became increasingly dominated by John's demands, she began to lose pieces of herself, her independence, her confidence, her sense of safety. The woman who had once been so full of hope and determination was now living in a constant state of fear, wondering when the next blow would come, what the next demand would be. But even as her world contracted under John's control, Elizabeth held on to one thing, her love for her son. He was her anchor, her reason to keep going, even when everything else seemed to be falling apart. Little did she know, the worst was yet to come. Because John's control wasn't just emotional, it was physical, financial, and psychological. And with each passing day, his grip on her grew tighter, his demands more extreme, his violence more unpredictable. This was the beginning of the end. The moment when love turned to fear, and fear turned to survival. And for Elizabeth, survival would soon become the only thing that mattered. The breaking point came on a cold, gray morning, when Elizabeth's worst fears became reality. John, the man who had once promised to love and protect her, crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. It began with her car, a symbol of her hard-earned independence. Elizabeth had saved every dollar she could to buy it, a small but significant step toward reclaiming her life. But to John, it was a threat. One night, in a fit of rage, he deliberately crashed it into a garage, leaving it mangled and useless. Then came the apartment. Elizabeth had worked tirelessly to secure her own place, a sanctuary where she and her son could feel safe. But John found ways to force his way in, shattering windows, violating restraining orders, and leaving behind a trail of destruction. Each broken pane of glass was a reminder of his rage, his control, his refusal to let her go. But the ultimate betrayal came when John took their son. It happened on a day like any other. Elizabeth had dropped her son off at daycare, relieved to know he was safe, even if only for a few hours. But when she returned to pick him up, he was gone. The daycare staff told her John had come by, claiming there was a family emergency. Elizabeth's heart sank. She knew this wasn't an emergency, it was a message. A chilling, calculated message. If you want to see him again, you'll stay. For many, this would have been the breaking point. The moment when fear won, when hope was extinguished. But for Elizabeth, it was the moment she decided enough was enough. She was done living in fear. Done walking on eggshells. Done sacrificing her life, her dreams, her son's future, to a man who saw her not as a partner, but as property. Elizabeth began to plan her escape, knowing it could cost her everything. She reached out to domestic violence shelters, filed police reports, and documented every threat, every violation, every act of violence. But the system, designed to protect people like her, repeatedly failed her. Restraining orders were ignored. Police reports were filed away. And John remained free, his control growing stronger with each passing day. But Elizabeth refused to give up. She knew the risks, knew that leaving an abuser is the most dangerous time for a victim. But she also knew that staying was no longer an option. And so, she began to prepare. She saved money in secret, hid important documents, and memorized escape routes. She told only a few trusted friends, knowing that one wrong move could unravel everything. What she didn't know was that John was watching, waiting, planning. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. A confrontation that would test Elizabeth's courage, her resilience, and her will to survive. This was the breaking point. The moment when fear turned to action, and action turned to survival. And survival would come at a cost. The night Elizabeth ran for her life began like any other. The winter air was crisp, the streets of Chicago's South Side quiet and still. She had no way of knowing that John had been watching her, learning her routines, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As she stepped out of her car in the 7800 block of South Mosen, John's car pulled up beside her. Security cameras would later capture the scene. A conversation that started calmly, but quickly turned into a confrontation. John begged her to get in his car. His voice was desperate, pleading. "Just come home," he said. "We can work this out." But Elizabeth had heard those words before. Words that promised change, but delivered only more pain. This time, she stood her ground. "No," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I'm not going back." In that moment, Elizabeth made a choice that would nearly cost her her life. She chose freedom over fear, courage over control. What happened next would be captured not only by security cameras, but would echo through social media in a chilling series of live broadcasts that would shock viewers across the country. John, the man who had claimed to love her, reached for his weapon. The first shot rang out, then another and another. In total, 11 bullets would tear through Elizabeth's body, each one a testament to the system's failure to protect her. But John wasn't finished. In what investigators would later describe as an attempt to eliminate witnesses, he turned his gun on Elizabeth's grandmother and uncle, firing 8 more times. Most horrifying of all, as Elizabeth lay bleeding on the pavement, John turned his weapon toward the car where their young son sat, watching the nightmare unfold. He emptied his clip into the vehicle, firing every remaining bullet he had. The chaos that followed was captured in real time, on security cameras, on social media, and in the memories of those who witnessed it. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, fighting to save 3 lives. But perhaps the most chilling moment came when John, in a twisted act of desperation, went live on Facebook, broadcasting a series of confessions that would provide a rare and disturbing glimpse into the mind of an abuser. "I love that woman dearly," he repeated, his voice breaking with emotion. But these proclamations of love stood in stark contrast to the brutality of his actions just moments before. As viewers watched in real time, John cycled through a range of emotions, from remorse to justification, from love to hate. It was a haunting digital footprint, one that would give investigators and the public an unprecedented look into the mind of someone who had just committed an unthinkable act of violence. Meanwhile, at the University of Chicago Medical Center, doctors fought to save 3 lives. Elizabeth had been hit 11 times, her grandmother and uncle 8 times each. Their survival would later be described as nothing short of miraculous. But for Elizabeth, the fight was far from over. This was the night she ran for her life. The night she said no. The night she chose freedom over fear. And it was only the beginning. As Elizabeth lay in the hospital, fighting for her life, the world outside was grappling with the aftermath of a nightmare. The shooting had left an entire community reeling, its shockwaves rippling far beyond the streets of Chicago's South Side. Elizabeth had been hit 11 times, bullets tearing through her pelvis, her legs, her very sense of safety. Her grandmother and uncle, caught in the crossfire, had each been struck 8 times. The medical team at the University of Chicago Medical Center would later describe their survival as nothing short of miraculous. But survival was only the beginning. As doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize Elizabeth, John, the man who had pulled the trigger, took to social media, broadcasting a chilling confession that would leave the world stunned. "I love that woman dearly," he repeated, his voice breaking with emotion. But these proclamations of love stood in stark contrast to the brutality of his actions just moments before. Viewers watched in real time as John cycled through a range of emotions, from remorse to justification, from love to hate. He spoke of his pain, his desperation, his inability to let go. But beneath his words was a darker truth. This was not just a crime of passion. It was a calculated act of control, a final attempt to dominate the woman who had dared to defy him. The immediate aftermath of the shooting created a haunting digital footprint, one that would give investigators and the public an unprecedented look into the mind of someone who had just committed an unthinkable act of violence. But for Elizabeth's family, the aftermath was far more personal. Her grandmother and uncle, both in critical condition, faced a long road to recovery. The emotional scars ran even deeper. Every beep of a monitor, every flash of a news report, every unexpected noise was a reminder of the horror they had endured. And then there was Elizabeth's son, the young boy who had witnessed the entire attack. "Come on, Mama," he had said during the shooting, trying to help his mother as she lay bleeding on the pavement. The impact of such violence on a child's developing mind would become another layer of this tragic story, one that would require long-term therapeutic intervention. The community, too, was left reeling. Neighbors who had heard the gunshots, friends who had watched the Facebook Live broadcast, strangers who had followed the news, all were united in their shock, their grief, their anger. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of the aftermath was the realization that this tragedy could have been prevented. Elizabeth had sought help time and time again, filing police reports, obtaining restraining orders, reaching out to shelters. Yet the system, designed to protect people like her, had repeatedly failed her. As the days turned into weeks, the questions began to mount. How had John been allowed to escalate his violence unchecked? Why had the restraining orders been ignored? What could have been done to prevent this tragedy? These questions would haunt not only Elizabeth's family, but the entire community. They would spark debates, inspire calls for reform, and force a reckoning with the gaps in the system meant to protect victims of domestic violence. But for Elizabeth, the aftermath was more than just a series of questions. It was a fight to heal, to rebuild, to reclaim her life. And it was a fight she was determined to win. The legal battle that followed the shooting was not just a fight for justice, it was a reckoning. A reckoning with a system that had repeatedly failed Elizabeth, a system that had allowed John's violence to escalate unchecked, despite multiple warnings, multiple pleas for help. As the case unfolded, the gaps in the system became impossible to ignore. Restraining orders, designed to protect victims like Elizabeth, had been little more than pieces of paper. Police reports, filed in desperation, had been buried in bureaucracy. And the courts, overwhelmed and underfunded, had moved too slowly to prevent tragedy. Elizabeth's case became a rallying cry for change. It exposed the cracks in a system meant to protect victims, revealing a frightening truth. For many, the system was not a shield, but a sieve. The evidence presented in court was damning. Surveillance footage showed John's car circling the neighborhood multiple times before the shooting, suggesting premeditation. His Facebook Live confession, initially seeming like an emotional outburst, was analyzed by forensic psychologists who identified patterns of manipulation common among abusers. But perhaps the most disturbing evidence came from Elizabeth herself. Hundreds of threatening text messages, documented instances of stalking, and testimony from witnesses painted a picture of a man consumed by control, willing to do whatever it took to maintain it. Yet, even as the evidence mounted, the defense tried to portray the shooting as an isolated incident, fueled by emotional distress. It was a narrative that Elizabeth's legal team fought tirelessly to dismantle, calling on experts to explain the patterns of domestic violence, the cycles of abuse, and the ways in which abusers manipulate their victims. The trial also revealed another troubling truth. Elizabeth was not John's first victim. Several other women came forward during the proceedings, sharing their own experiences with him. Their stories revealed a pattern of behavior that stretched back years, a pattern that had gone unnoticed, unpunished, until it was too late. As the legal battle dragged on, Elizabeth's family faced another kind of fight, a fight to heal, to rebuild, to find some semblance of normalcy. The emotional toll of the trial was immense, reopening wounds that had only just begun to heal. But through it all, Elizabeth remained steadfast. She attended every hearing, her presence a silent reminder of the stakes. She spoke out about the need for reform, using her story to shine a light on the failures of the system. Her case sparked intense debate within Chicago's legal community. Legislators began examining the gaps in existing domestic violence laws, particularly focusing on the enforcement of restraining orders and the need for better protection for victims during the high-risk period when they attempt to leave their abusers. Advocacy groups pointed to the numerous times Elizabeth had sought help through official channels, only to find the system inadequate to protect her. They called for better training for law enforcement, more resources for victims, and stricter consequences for restraining order violations. The Chicago Police Department initiated a review of their domestic violence response protocols, acknowledging that multiple opportunities to intervene had been missed. They began implementing new training programs for officers, emphasizing the recognition of escalating danger signs and the importance of taking protective order violations seriously. But for Elizabeth, the legal battle was about more than just justice. It was about accountability. It was about ensuring that no one else would have to endure what she had endured. Her case became a teaching tool for law enforcement, social workers, and domestic violence advocates, illustrating the need for comprehensive support systems for victims attempting to escape abuse. It highlighted the importance of listening to victims, believing their stories, and taking action before it was too late. And it served as a stark reminder of the cost of inaction, a cost measured not just in lives lost, but in lives forever changed. Elizabeth's fight was far from over. But with each step forward, she was rewriting the narrative, not just for herself, but for countless others trapped in the cycle of abuse. This was more than a legal battle. It was a fight for change, and it was a fight Elizabeth was determined to win. Today, Elizabeth is more than a survivor. She's a beacon of hope, a living testament to the power of resilience, the strength of the human spirit, and the importance of speaking out. Her journey to recovery has been long and arduous. The physical wounds have healed, but the emotional scars remain, a constant reminder of the battle she fought and the life she reclaimed. Elizabeth's days are no longer defined by fear, but by purpose. She has become a fierce advocate for domestic violence awareness, using her story to shine a light on the darkness that so many endure in silence. At events across the country, she stands before crowds, her voice steady, her message clear. It's not worth it. You deserve better. Her words resonate with survivors and advocates alike, offering a lifeline to those still trapped in the cycle of abuse. She speaks of the importance of recognizing the signs, of seeking help, of believing in the possibility of a better future. But Elizabeth's advocacy goes beyond words. She has worked tirelessly to push for legislative change, meeting with lawmakers, testifying before committees, and lending her voice to campaigns aimed at strengthening protections for victims. Her efforts have not gone unnoticed. Elizabeth's story has inspired new policies, increased funding for domestic violence prevention programs, and sparked a national conversation about the need for systemic reform. Yet, for all her public triumphs, Elizabeth's most profound victories have been private. The moments spent rebuilding her life, one step at a time. The joy of watching her son grow, free from the shadow of fear. The quiet pride of knowing she has not only survived, but thrived. Her cosmetics business, once a symbol of her independence, has flourished. It's more than just a business now. It's a testament to her resilience, her creativity, her refusal to let her past define her. And then there's her son, the light of her life. Together, they have navigated the aftermath of trauma, finding strength in each other and hope in the future. Elizabeth has made it her mission to ensure that her son grows up in a world where love does not mean control, where safety is not a privilege but a right. Elizabeth's story is far from over. Every day she continues to heal, to grow, to fight. She knows the road ahead will not be easy, but she also knows she is not alone. Her message to survivors is simple yet powerful. You are not alone. You are not to blame. And you are stronger than you think. Elizabeth's journey is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is hope. That even when the world seems to conspire against you, there is a way forward. And that no matter how broken you may feel, you have the power to rebuild, to rise, to reclaim your life. This is Elizabeth's story. But it is also a story for all of us, a story of courage, of resilience, of the unbreakable human spirit. And it is a story that is still being written. Elizabeth's story is a powerful reminder of the courage it takes to break free from abuse, and the importance of standing together as a community to support survivors. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please know that help is available. You are not alone. Reach out to local organizations, call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE or text START to 88788. There are people who care, resources to help, and a way forward. Here at Crime Storyteller, we believe in the power of stories to educate, inspire, and create change. By sharing stories like Elizabeth's, we aim to shed light on the darkest corners of human experience and to empower survivors to reclaim their lives. But we can't do it without you. Don't forget to subscribe and join our community of critical thinkers. Together, we can raise awareness, spark important conversations, and save lives. Your support helps us bring these stories to light and ensures that no one has to face their struggles alone. Click the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've been moved by Elizabeth's journey, let us know in the comments below. Thank you for being part of the Crime Storyteller community. Together, we can make a difference.